Oh, and there's the canter. Give it one more minute and we'll get started.
Sure.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Breakfast Club, The Next Generation. I am pleased to welcome and introduce from England our presenter today, Amiel Kollek. Amiel grew up in Dundas and went to Temple Anche Sholem before he moved to Montreal to study math and computer science at McGill. After graduation, he joined Facebook, now Meta, to work on marketplace and Instagram shopping. He's now based in London, England, working at Lindis Health, a startup whose mission is to fix the broken clinical trials industry. It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce Amiel Kollek. Amiel, do you have slides you want to show, or?
I do, yes. Thank you for the
Okay,
introduction.
so I will make you a host. There you go. Feel free to share whenever you want.
Okay. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
Great. And let me know, my connection was a bit spotty earlier, but let me know if I drop out or anything, just send a message and I'll pause and take a step back. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Amiel. I used to attend Temple Anse Shalom, grew up in Dundas, and I am now a software engineer at a company called Lindis Health, based in London. And Lindis Health works on clinical trials. So clinical trials are the research that's done to prove that medicines work, and without them, we couldn't have any new medicines. And I joined Lindis Health because I learned just about how broken the clinical trial industry is. So as I say, clinical trials are broken. And just to sort of give a sense of how broken they are, I'm going to show a screenshot of someone who works in the clinical trial industry posting on Reddit online. It's not really important to get the details, but I hope it just conveys some of the frustration that people who work in this industry feel. I've also censored it because there were a few expletives in this post, but just to read some of the excerpts from this, you wouldn't know good quality data if it tried to sell you essential oils. If you make us use a special digital pen that somehow transmits lab rec data in real time, no, it doesn't, I will personally cancel Christmas. And I understand that canceling Christmas is quite a serious threat in the Goy community. And you wouldn't know how to read a PET CT report if it was written in the format of Goodnight Moon. Again, the details are not so important, but I hope this conveys some of the frustration that people working in the clinical trial industry feel. And just to show that it's not, one individual angry person, some of the comments were, I laughed, I cried, most of all, I related. Bravo, I feel you, and this is a beautiful rant, 10 out of 10. So seeing this, it's quite clear something is not right in the clinical trial industry. But first, before we get into clinical trials, how did I end up working here? My journey starts in Dundas in Hamilton. I was born in Dundas and attended Temple Anse Shalom as I grew up. I also went to Kehila. Here's a photo of me as some kind of Jewish cop at Kehila. After graduating high school, I moved to Montreal. I originally went to Montreal to study arts and science and psychology, but I discovered coding and how much I enjoyed it, so I ended up switching into math and computer science, and I got a degree in math and computer science. After graduating there, I went to Facebook, working in Seattle. Here's a picture of me with the Facebook like sign when I started working there. And I worked in Seattle with Facebook for about 2 years before I decided I kind of wanted to try living somewhere else. So after about 2 years, I left Seattle, stayed with Facebook, but moved to London, where I am now. I worked with Facebook for a few more years in London, and while I was there, Facebook turned into Meta. And then a couple years ago, I left and joined a company called Lindis Health, working on clinical trials. I mentioned that when I went to McGill, originally I went to study arts and science and psychology. But while I was there, I discovered that I actually really liked coding. And the thing that taught me that was hackathons. Hackathons are events, 24, 48, or 72-hour events, usually without too much sleep, where you kind of just get in a room and try to build something. It's not hacking in the sense of information security or stealing data, but rather there's another meaning of the word in the computer science community of just building things as quickly as possible. So I attended a hackathon. This is a picture from McGill's hackathon. I attended a hackathon and I just really, really enjoyed myself. I had a lot of fun. And I also think I learned by doing, and hackathons are very much a place where you do. So I really enjoyed myself, and it was enough to convince me to switch into computer science. And I think I found the technical challenges of computer science classes to be lots of fun. But the thing that I found really, really rewarding was seeing people enjoy using the things that I made or the things that I built. So, at hackathons, if you make a website or an app, seeing someone actually use it, I found that really rewarding. And that was sort of what got me into computer science. Doing these hackathons eventually led me to Meta, where I started after graduating. And I definitely enjoyed working there. Meta had a lot of perks. So this is a photo of their California headquarters. They have very beautiful offices, which was quite nice. And I really enjoyed working there. This headquarters also has an arcade, loads of ping pong tables, nap pods, all the kinds of things you associate with a tech office. There's also lots of free food, which is really nice, especially coming out of university, not having to cook. I really enjoyed just being able to eat at the office all the time. But most importantly, I got to build things that people actually used. So when I started at Facebook, I was working on Marketplace, which is a part of the Facebook app where people can buy and sell things. And I specifically worked on a part of Marketplace where you can put your home up for rent. And when I moved to London, I was working on Instagram shopping, which is where people can shop on Instagram. And both of those things are, quite widely used. So it was very rewarding for me to work on something that I saw lots of other people using. But my time changed, or Meta changed over my time there. So my first time working at Facebook was in 2016 when I interned there. As I was an intern in their California office. And at the time, Meta was about 15,000 employees. It sounds like a lot, but it felt a lot smaller. I think a lot of the newer employees who had just joined contributing to that big number. And as a result, everyone still sort of knew each other and knew a lot of people around the office. It felt like a lot of a smaller company vibe. And I remember on my second day, I saw Mark Zuckerberg walking around the office, which was very exciting for me. I was walking back from a meeting and someone asked me to step aside for a photo, and then Mark Zuckerberg walked by. That kind of small office vibe where the CEO is walking around, I really enjoyed. I also learned that Mark Zuckerberg's a lot shorter than he looks in photos. Also in 2016, no one had heard of Cambridge Analytica or any of the resulting scandals around data protection and data privacy. At the time, I think people really thought that social media was a completely positive thing. Why not connect people online? What could go wrong? There wasn't this discussion about data privacy and data protection as there is today. So working there felt nice. I felt like I was doing something good for the world. There was also a slogan that Facebook had back in 2016, move fast and break things. they've since changed it because it sounds like they're advocating people breaking things, which is not the intention. So it's now just move fast. But it was sort of an attitude that the company had around asking for forgiveness, not permission. And if you have an idea, just go for it. We now know that wasn't necessarily always a good thing. I think a lot of the data privacy concerns came out of that attitude in the company. But at the time, as an engineer, it was a lot of fun. I got to just build things, which I really enjoyed. So flash forward to 2022, which was when I left, and the company is now renamed to Meta. Now there are about 80,000 employees, and it definitely feels a lot more like a big company. So the vibe around the office was sort of much more corporate. Also, people are tending to use Facebook less and aren't necessarily as happy with Facebook. There have been all these scandals in the news, and people maybe don't love social media as much as they used to. And that makes it a little less enjoyable to work at a company if you don't really believe you're necessarily doing a good thing. Also, lots of bureaucracy was introduced. So in response to move fast and break things and the resulting data privacy issues, there was lots of approvals and things like that, which I believe they're necessary, and it's important to protect people's data, and Facebook has a large responsibility to do that. But as an engineer working there, it's a lot less fun when you have to get approvals for everything you do. So after about 5 years, I decided, you know what, I'm going to try something else. And I have to say, they really struggled without me. This is a screenshot of Meta's share price. You can see right around the time of my resignation, it's a very, very big drop. And I can only assume it was because I left. Of course, if we fast forward a little bit, we can see that actually, maybe not. Meta is doing just fine without me, thankfully. So after working at Meta, I wanted to work on something that was potentially more meaningful and maybe a little bit more positive for the world. And that's what brought me back to clinical trials. So let's talk a little bit more about clinical trials and why they're so broken. Just going to take a sip of water. So going into the history of clinical trials, the first recorded clinical trial is actually in the Old Testament, believe it or not. Took place in 600 BC. And Daniel is in the Babylonian court. And the Babylonians do not eat a kosher diet. And Daniel insists that he must eat a kosher diet. But the Babylonians say that if you don't eat our food, you're going to start looking bad. And Daniel says, no, I'll look fine even if I eat kosher. So the question was, does kosher food make you look better? And for 10 days, Daniel and his friends ate only kosher, whereas the Babylonian army ate their regular diet. And at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked great. So the answer is yes. Kosher food does make you look better, which is good to hear. And this was the first actually recorded example of anything like a clinical trial. But it doesn't look very much like the clinical trials we have today. So flash forward to 1847. And this is when we have the first modern clinical trial, something we'd recognize today. And it was conducted by a man named James Lind, who happens to be the namesake of the company I work at, Lindis Health. He was trying to determine what could cure scurvy. So he tested 6 different potential cures for scurvy. He tried cider, hydrochloric acid. I would not have wanted to be in that test group because that can be very painful and kill you. Vinegar, seawater, barley water, and oranges and lemons. And we now know that scurvy is caused by vitamin C deficiency. So the oranges and lemons worked. The citrus fruits cured scurvy. And through this clinical trial, James Lind proved that. As a side effect, he also enabled the creation of the Sicilian mafia. As soon as it was determined that lemons were a cure for scurvy, the demand went way up, and the amount of money flowing into Sicily, where lemons are grown, went way up as well, and that enabled the creation of the Sicilian mafia. But that's more of another presentation, maybe. So coming forward to today, all new treatments need a clinical trial in order to be given as medicine. So various health agencies around the world will require a clinical trial before a medicine can be prescribed by doctors. In the US, that's the FDA. Japan has the PMDA. Here in the UK, we have the MHRA. The EU has the European Medicines Agency, and Canada has Health Canada. So whenever someone wants to sell a drug, they need to prove that the drug works by a medical trial. Quite interestingly, the specific requirements of each agency is actually a little different. So China's NMPA used to only allow drugs to be sold in China if the clinical trial was run in China. And that's for two reasons. One was it's an opportunity for them to kickstart a domestic clinical trial industry. But also there were concerns about ethnic differences in populations. And if a drug was proven to work on a Western population, it might not actually necessarily work on a Chinese population. So today, you do not need to run a trial in China to sell a drug in China, but you have to include in your submission an analysis of the ethnic differences and how people respond to the drug, which is quite interesting. But regardless of where you are, there's always a trial that's required before you can sell a new drug. And this doesn't apply to just drugs. It applies to drugs and medical devices as well. So that would be syringes, scanners, all of these require a clinical trial. And interestingly, software is considered a medical device, which means that AI is technically a medical device. And it's quite a hot topic amongst these regulators now, when to require a trial for AI. So it's interesting to see where we land on that. So maybe let's walk through a quick example of discovering a potential cure or medicine, and then what it takes to go from that to doctors actually prescribing that medicine and it being used to treat patients. So let's say we have an example for a pharmaceutical company called Gefilta Pharmaceuticals. And they have discovered a brand new drug that's a miracle drug. It's Oivazempic, and it can cure lactose intolerance. So this is a very big deal, of course, and they want to try and bring it to market. They want to sell Oivazempic because it's going to relieve a lot of people's pain for the lactose intolerant. So in order to sell the drug, they need to first design a trial. They need to say, how many people are we going to recruit? We're going to give how many of them, half of them Oivazempic, half of them another treatment, and how long are we going to test them for? What data are we going to collect? And they'll do all that and write it in a document called the study protocol. Next, they need to actually run the trial. That means actually finding people who are willing to participate, giving them the drug, and collecting data to see how they're responding to it. Finally, they need to analyze the data to determine whether Oivazempic actually does cure lactose intolerance. And then next, they need to submit it to the FDA or another regulator in order to get permission to actually sell the drug. So this process is actually very, very complicated. I'm going to step through the process bit by bit, but the point is it's complicated. So if you're not following along for the whole thing, that's totally fine. The key takeaway is that there's a lot of steps and a lot of people involved. So we start with Gefilta Pharmaceuticals, and they have discovered Oivazempic. They need to have a study protocol. They need to design their trial. So they'll hire some protocol writers. The protocol writers will design a trial, write a document, and send them back a Word document that says, this is the trial that you should run. And Gefilta Pharmaceuticals says, thank you. But Gefilta Pharmaceuticals, their expertise is developing treatments and discovering drugs. They don't know how to run trials themselves. So typically what they'll do is they'll actually outsource the trial to a company called a clinical research organization. And we call them CROs, clinical research organizations, or CROs, basically subcontract all the pieces of the trial and coordinate the trial for the pharmaceutical company, which we call the sponsor. So this CRO will then reach out to a bunch of different sites, let's say hospitals, and ask the sites, hey, can you find some patients at your hospital who are lactose intolerant? And do you mind testing and seeing if they're willing to be part of this trial so we can test this new drug? And sure, the sites will say, yes, we're happy to be involved. So already it's getting quite complicated, but it's going to get worse because this site's actually Shomer Shabbos and they don't collect any data on Saturday. So things are getting complicated and we're not even fully done yet. So at this point you think, okay, maybe I'm following along. Maybe I know what's going on. But it does continue to get more complicated what if this first clinical research organization actually can't recruit participants fast enough? So what the Gefilta Pharmaceuticals will do is they'll hire a second one and say, hey, can you go find more hospitals so we can recruit more participants so we can get the data fast enough? And the second CRO will say, sure, finds a few more hospitals. And then finally, we've collected enough data. And at this point, it's already getting messy. There's lots of different hospitals involved, lots of different people. But thankfully, we collected the data we need, and they give it all back to Gefilte Pharmaceuticals. But there's a problem. Site 1 and Site 2, they collected the data on paper. Site 3 used one software. Site 4 and Site 5 used an Excel spreadsheet. It's all kind of a mess. So what Gefilte Pharmaceuticals will do is they'll hire what's called clinical data programmers, who then take all this data and put it into one format. And now that it's in one format, we can go to the biostatisticians, who then analyze the data and determine whether the treatment actually worked or not. And then finally, the biostatisticians can tell the sponsor, if Gefilte Pharmaceuticals, did Ozempic actually work or did it not? Again, not important to know the details, just to know it is very complicated and it will make you panic if you start to look too deeply into it. In addition to having all these different people involved, the communication is really, really messy. So Gefilte Pharmaceuticals will describe to the protocol writers, here's the study we want. The protocol writers will send back a Word doc. And a Word document, it's written in human language. It can be ambiguous. It can be inconsistent. So that's passed on to the clinical research organization, which in turn is, interpreting the document differently. And then it's sending it to the sites that are all interpreting the document a little bit differently. And then CRO 1 sends the data in one format. CRO 2 sends the data in another format. We hand it off to the clinical data programmers, who put it into a third format, and then the result is sent back to the sponsor. It's all very, very messy. And importantly, it's also imprecise. Every single one of these communications, something can go wrong. And if something goes wrong, the trial might have to be thrown out. But believe it or not, that's not the only problem. Let's say all that mess, it actually worked out. Everything went according to plan. Sometimes, even if the protocol is followed and things went according to plan, the right data still isn't collected. And that's because the people designing the trial, they are not biostatisticians. And sometimes they will design a trial that doesn't actually allow us to determine if a treatment worked or not. So we've been going through this example with a lactose intolerance cure. The stakes feel quite low, but sometimes the stakes are quite high. And sometimes these are treatments for, these are life-saving treatments for people with very serious diseases. And just to think about the implications of them taking time out of their day to drive an hour to a hospital to receive a treatment and potentially getting a placebo. And they're doing this out of the belief that they're, either getting access to an early treatment or helping others by making a treatment available in the future, by proving that it works. They go through all this trouble, and at the end, it was for nothing because it was a poorly designed trial. This is very, very sad, and it does unfortunately happen. So in addition to the moral implications of this, the results tend to be slow progress and really, really big costs. And this means that fewer new treatments are actually released. And every 9 years, the cost of bringing a new drug to the market doubles. There's something called Moore's Law, which states that every few years, the power of our computers doubles. In clinical trials, we have the opposite. We have Eroom's Law, which is Moore's Law backwards. And that states that the cost doubles every few years. And you would think that as our computers get stronger and stronger, it would be cheaper and cheaper to collect data and analyze it. But unfortunately, it's not. Part of the problem is that the clinical research organizations, the CROs, really don't have an incentive to fix this mess. They get paid by the hour. So they're not really interested in making things more efficient, because the more efficient they are, the less money they make, unfortunately. But fear not, there is a solution. The solution is really to fix this broken communication, and catch problems early on so we don't waste people's time and delay treatments. And the solution to this is through software. And that's where I come in. So software can help. If we have the right software, we can run a clinical trial more effectively and not waste as much time and resources. That's me. So I'm going to run through a quick example of what it could look like in a more efficient world. Gefilte Pharmaceuticals discovers Ozempic. The first thing they do, instead of going to a protocol writer, is they go to a biostatistician and they ask the biostatistician, what data do I actually need to collect so that I can prove that this medicine works or not? Biostatistician enters everything they know into a clinical trial software that understands clinical trials and can help them design an effective and efficient clinical trial. And we don't even need to write a protocol because actually we can use AI to generate a protocol that will be more correct than one written by humans. It'll have less errors than those written by humans. Next, the sites, they can all log into this clinical trial software and they can enter the data that they collect from participants directly into the clinical trial software. And that means we can instantly analyze the data to determine if a treatment works or not. And there's actually really, really big implications for this. Right now, it's possible to run a trial and not know, let's say after 1 month, we've collected enough data. But we don't know if we've collected enough data until we do an analysis all the way at the end, because the original study protocol said the trial was going to last a year. So for 11 months, we give people a treatment that doesn't work in the control arm. And even though we have the data to be able to say that the treatment that we're testing does work. So by not being able to analyze results instantly, we're actually potentially giving people treatments that we know don't work, but we haven't been able to collect all the data to prove that yet. It is really, really big sort of implications for being able to instantly recognize when we know for sure that a treatment actually works. Additionally, we can use AI to look at the data and determine if there are issues. For example, maybe men over 50, when they take this drug, are getting a lot of headaches. And that's kind of a cause for concern. Someone should look into that. It's not very easy to do that now when the data is all scattered everywhere. But if it's all in one system, we can catch these safety issues much more quickly and potentially prevent dangerous drugs from going to the market. Additionally, because it's all in one system, it can learn. So if a trial runs effectively, it can feed back into the next trial so that new trials are more efficient and better run than the ones before. So it's definitely much cleaner and much better than the current system. Now, what does this mean for me on my day-to-day? So like I said, the thing that got me into software engineering and computer science is really building things. And my day-to-day is still building things. I spend a lot of time talking to clinicians, understanding their problems and their frustrations with how clinical trials work today. I then also help decide what we build. This isn't something I do alone. I work with other software engineers or project managers and project designers to decide what are we going to build. And this is actually something I really like about working at a small company where I am now compared to Meta, is that I have a lot more involvement in that process and a lot more influence over that process. And I find it very rewarding to be able to sort of set the direction of the thing that we're building. And of course, I am a software engineer after all. I spend a lot of my time coding. The work at Lindus Health is definitely different from the work at Facebook and Meta. So Facebook has billions of users, and there's a lot of technical challenges when you're trying to create a website that 1 billion people can log on to. It gets very difficult very quickly. Whereas at Lindus Health, a clinical trial tends to rarely exceed 10,000 people. 10,000 participants would be a very large clinical trial. So there's a lot less of those technical problems that come with big numbers, and I can focus a lot more on the actual problems that I'm trying to solve. Additionally, the domain I worked at Facebook and Meta, which is mostly e-commerce, shopping online, tends to be simpler. But trials, as we've seen, are very complex. And I really enjoy getting to sink my teeth into a complex space like that and try to see what can we build to solve people's problems here. Finally, just the subject matter. I mean, working at Facebook, we're helping people share photos, which is great, but I really find working at Lindus Health much, much more rewarding, knowing that by improving clinical trials, we really can help save lives. So I find that very rewarding. I wanted to just end on a quote here. Now, I recognize the irony of quoting Henry Ford to a Zoom full of Jews, but if it's any reassurance, he probably never actually said this. But I do think it's a good quote, which is that if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And that's to say, people tend to understand the problems that they have, but may not see the same solution that you see. So people wanted to get from A to B faster, and therefore they would have asked for a faster horse. But what Henry Ford did instead was build a car. And that's kind of like what I believe that me and my team are trying to do in clinical trials. We're doing our best to understand the problems people are facing, but ultimately building an entirely new system that's never been seen before. And I say we're trying to build cars. I find that lots of fun and very rewarding. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent presentation, Amiel. Thank you for that. I really wasn't sure what you were going to talk about, but I deeply appreciate what you shared, and it was very well put together. And of course, the trademark Kollek humor is always there. So thank you. We've got lots of time for questions. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask, Amiel, just unmute yourself and jump right in. Anybody?
Okay, I'll jump in. You talk about AI data being better. Isn't that just I'm still sort of questioning this whole AI thing. Isn't AI input data by individuals? So how do you trust that what is being input is accurate? Isn't it kind of like Wikipedia, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think just on its own, I definitely would trust data from a person more than I trust anything from AI. What we do when we sort of use AI to help write these study protocols is there's actually a lot of human input and structure that we impose before we sort of get to the AI point. But one of the key problems with these documents is they're so big that they naturally get inconsistent. And it's very difficult for a human to read a 30-page document and spot that actually on page 5, we said X, but on page 9, we said Y, just because there's so much information and context. So what we'd like to do is sort of provide as much structure to the documents as possible, very, very clear headings with a very clear understanding of what is supposed to go into each. And then that's where the AI can come in and help us spot those inconsistencies. Because even if it's written a combination of a human with some help from an AI, spotting those types of inconsistencies is something that AI tends to be quite good at, because we're sort of telling it, here's what we think. Can you just make sure that it all makes sense, that the pieces all fit together? It tends to be quite good. We do tend to use the term AI assisted as opposed to fully AI generated, because it is a combination of humans and AI to speed things up. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
I have a question, Amiel. Given the complexity and depth of involvement in each one of these clinical trials, what's the percentage of products that pass the trials, and what's the percentage that don't pass?
It's actually a really good question, and I don't know the answer. And part of the problem is that companies will not necessarily publish their clinical trial if it doesn't succeed, because they have no reason to. And there have been some quite tragic examples in the past of a company investigating a drug, and it started the clinical trial, but the drug caused an awful lot of internal bleeding. So they stopped the clinical trial and never published it. And then a few years later, a different company thought, oh, this drug might work, let's try. And they did it again. And the people participating in that clinical trial really, thankfully, no one died, but it was quite serious. So there's been a lot of efforts in the industry to increase transparency. And there are, for things like this now, where it's a very serious side effect, there is that transparency. But when something just didn't work, people tend to just not publish it because maybe it makes them look bad, or they don't really have a reason to.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, Amiel. Finally, I'm your mother. as you know. And finally, I understand what you do for a living. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the presentation. I have a question. What's the most interesting drug that Lindus that you've been working on?
It's a good question, actually. I don't have a good answer. I think partly because on the software engineering team, we tend to not get involved too much with the specifics of individual trials. We're very focused on building a system that will work for all kinds of trials that might come through. One of the ones we had recently that I thought was quite interesting was it's a diagnostic tampon for STIs. So in order to help people identify STIs quicker, it's just a regular tampon as you would use, but the tampon will be able to identify if you have an STI. I thought that was quite an interesting one. But yeah, I tend to not get too involved with any of the individual treatments.
So you don't necessarily know the details about the drug. You're just presented with all the communication problems and trying to sort out a system. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay. No ambitions to become a doctor then at this point.
No, I'm afraid not. Sorry, Dad. Well,
thanks.
Other questions? Okay, somebody by the name of Daniel Kollek has a question in the chat box. Says he doesn't have a microphone, so he's texting. Can you use AI to define or refine the research questions?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think there's actually sort of two different pieces to that. But once we have a system that has run many clinical trials, we can sort of learn from past data, and we should be able to hopefully say, if you ask the research question this way, it's less likely to be successful than if you were to ask it this way. And one of the common applications that we already do actually based on past data is looking at the criteria for who should be in a clinical trial. Drug companies tend to want to be very, very specific so that the data proves that the treatment does work. They'll say, we only want people between the age of 18 and 25, and they should only be, have these conditions very specifically because they're trying to increase the likelihood that the drug works. But it also decreases the likelihood that the trial will succeed because if there's fewer and fewer people, it's harder to find them and recruit them. And it also decreases the likelihood that the drug will actually work for everybody else who isn't included in the trial in the first place. So we do already use AI to try and identify the criteria that are likely not going to be successful. There's another aspect, which is that once we have a lot of data on clinical trials, sometimes you might be able to answer the question without even running a clinical trial. If one trial, collected blood pressure data for some unrelated reason and then used some drug for some unrelated reason, and another trial collected two other pieces of data, maybe if we put the pieces together, that actually has our answer. We don't need to run a clinical trial. But it's hard to do that when the data is so scattered and sometimes not published. So AI is definitely something that can be used to sort of pull in all the data that we have to say, you know what, you don't even need to run a trial. I have the answer right away. It's this, which is amazing, both in terms of, it removes the risk to any participants who would then go on to participate in a trial, but also means that the treatment can just go ahead. It doesn't need to wait, a year or something for the trial to complete.
Other questions or comments? Okay. I think the sign of an impressive and presentation is when people don't have questions because you've provided the information. Amiel, thank you so much for joining with us. What time is it there?
It is just about 5 o'clock, 4:45.
Oh, okay. So thank you for being with us and zooming in, and Kollek on the important work that you're doing. Do you see your sister much in London?
Yes, yeah. Not today, unfortunately, but she does come down quite often.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again, and we really appreciate your presentation. Just want to remind everybody, if your Shavuot is soon to be with us, and This afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock, the cantor and I will be presenting a pre-Shavuot workshop. What is Shavuot? We'll be covering some texts of the background of it. It's really quite unique amongst the major festivals. So we will hope you will join us for that. Yeah, and then if you're able, next Friday is confirmation. We have 2 outstanding young men who have continued their Jewish educations, and we're going to be honoring them. So if you can, join us next Friday. And there's going to be a lovely dessert oneg after the service as well. I wish everybody Shavua Tov, a good week, and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Take care, everybody.